They arrived not as tourists, but as heirs. Afro-descendants from across the world, from Brazil, the Caribbean, the United States, walked the red soil of Burkina Faso, greeted by drums, songs, and one man standing at the center of a new African story, Ibrahim Traoré. "You have not come to a foreign land," he told them. "You have come home to your roots." His words carried more than welcome. They carried history. For centuries, Africa's sons and daughters had been taken away, enslaved, scattered, renamed. Now the descendants of that trauma were returning not in chains, but in choice. Politically, this moment was not ceremonial. It was strategic. By embracing the African diaspora, Traoré was building bridges stronger than any foreign alliance bridges made of identity, trust, and shared destiny. While the West sees Africa as a market, Traoré sees it as a family united not by borders, but by belonging. From my perspective, this gesture marks the start of a new diplomacy, one built on roots, not debts. It transforms the pain of exile into an asset of unity. Because when the descendants of Africa return, not to weep over the past, but to invest in the future, it's not just a homecoming. It's a resurrection, a continent remembering who it was and deciding who it will be. For years, Western media painted Burkina Faso as a land of chaos, a nation defined by coups, poverty, and conflict. To them, it was a country in crisis. But when Ibrahim Traoré stood before the returning diaspora, his words cut through that narrative like a blade through fog. Burkina resists. Burkina stands. Burkina lives. This was not just rhetoric. It was counter-propaganda. Traoré understood that in today's world, the first battlefield is perception. Whoever defines the image defines the truth. Under colonialism, Africa's image was rewritten by outsiders. In the post-colonial era, that manipulation never ended. It simply moved to television screens, NGO reports, and social media feeds. So when Traoré spoke of communication as a weapon, he wasn't exaggerating. He was declaring an information war. From a strategic lens, this is about more than journalism, it's psychological sovereignty. If the world only sees Africa through someone else's camera, then Africa remains an object, not an author. And from my perspective, Traoré's media offensive is one of his sharpest political tools. He isn't trying to please the West, he's trying to reprogram Africa's self-image, to replace pity with pride, to turn headlines of instability into stories of resilience. Because before Africa can feed the world, it must first feed its own confidence. And that begins by breaking the siege, not with soldiers, but with truth told in Africa's own voice. When Traoré announced that Afro-descendants would no longer need to pay fees to obtain permanent residency in Burkina Faso, the applause wasn't just emotional, it was historical. "The land of your ancestors does not charge you to come home," he said. For decades, Africa's diaspora has been treated as visitors, not heirs, welcomed symbolically, but burdened administratively. Traoré's decision reversed that logic. It was not an act of generosity, it was a declaration of unity. He reframed citizenship not as a bureaucratic privilege, but as a birthright. Because in his philosophy, the African identity doesn't stop at the continent's borders, it stretches across oceans, carried in memory, in struggle, and in skin. This policy, seemingly small, is in fact strategic. It turns emotional connection into economic potential. Every Afro-descendant who returns brings capital knowledge and networks resources that Africa once lost to slavery and colonization. From a political perspective, Traoré is doing what no Western development agency can, transforming nostalgia into investment. He is inviting Africans abroad to not just visit the continent, but to rebuild it. And personally, I see in this moment something profound. While the West sells citizenship for millions through golden visa programs, Burkina Faso offers it for love and belonging. Because Traoré understands that the most powerful passport is not a document, it's an identity. When Ibrahim Traoré stood before the crowd and declared, "It is possible for Africa to feed the world," he wasn't making a slogan, he was issuing a challenge. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country once dependent on food imports, is now positioning itself as a model of agricultural sovereignty. In Traoré's doctrine, sovereignty is no longer just about borders or armies. It's about the ability to feed your people without begging. He outlined 4 strategic sectors: agriculture, agro-industry, energy, and real estate. Together, they form the backbone of a vision, an Africa that doesn't survive on aid, but thrives on production. Under his leadership, the government distributed thousands of tractors, motor pumps, and tons of fertilizer and seeds to smallholder farmers. He linked this campaign to a broader Sahel initiative, developing irrigation canals, training agronomists, and mechanizing production. The philosophy is simple but revolutionary. If Africa becomes the world's breadbasket, then it controls its own destiny. If it continues to depend on imported food, then independence is an illusion. From my analysis, this shift is not merely economic, it's ideological. Traoré is weaponizing the soil itself, turning farming into a form of resistance. Each harvest becomes an act of liberation, each seed a declaration of independence. Because in the modern age, war is no longer fought only with guns. It's fought with rainwater and self-reliance. And in this new kind of war, the farmer is the frontline soldier, and the soil is the new battlefield of freedom. When Traoré spoke of Africa's conflicts, Sudan, Congo, and the Sahel, his tone shifted from triumph to warning. It must stop, he said. The manipulation, the weapons, the division, it must end. In that single moment, he was not only addressing foreign powers, but also Africa itself. For decades outside, forces have fueled African wars under the banner of peacekeeping, selling both arms and aid to maintain dependency. And within corrupt elites have played along, turning national crises into personal gain. From my perspective, Traoré's message strikes at the root of this system. Africa's greatest enemy is not poverty. It is fragmentation. Because every conflict between neighbors strengthens the hand of those who profit from chaos. He understands that true liberation demands unity, not slogans, but structure. When one African nation falls, it weakens the whole. When one rises, it proves that the entire continent can stand. This is why he links Burkina Faso's struggle to the wider African front, not as a local rebellion, but as the front line of Pan-African sovereignty. And here lies the deeper logic of his diplomacy. Burkina Faso's war is not against nations. It's against the system that keeps nations divided. In a world where global powers exploit division as strategy, Traoré's call for unity is not idealism, it's survival. Because if Africa remains fractured, it will always be managed. But if Africa unites, it becomes unmanageable. When Traoré turned to the crowd again, his voice softened, but his message deepened. Only united can we go far, he said. He wasn't just speaking about unity between nations, but unity between generations. In a continent where youth are often silenced and elders sidelined, he called for a fusion of both the energy of the young with the wisdom of the old. For him, Africa's strength lies not in imitation, but in integration. He envisions a new ecosystem where engineers, farmers, soldiers, and teachers work toward one shared goal: building a continent that no longer exports its talent or its hope. From a political standpoint, this message is revolutionary. Traoré is crafting what I call generational sovereignty, a continuity of vision that survives leadership changes. He knows that without the youth, there is no innovation. Without the elders, there is no direction. And this philosophy is already taking form. The Alliance of Sahel States, AES, uniting Burkina Faso, Mali, And Niger operates not as a temporary coalition, but as the blueprint of an African federation built on cooperation, not dependency. My personal view. This is where Africa's true rebirth begins, not in the corridors of power, but in the collaboration between experience and enthusiasm. Because when the young dream and the old guide nations stop surviving and start evolving, that is how a generation turns pain into purpose and history into heritage. As the meeting drew to a close, the air in Ouagadougou was heavy, not with politics, but with meaning. Traoré raised his hand and said softly, "The homeland, or death." It was not a call to arms, it was a vow, a promise that the fight for Africa's dignity would outlive him, carried by those who believe that freedom must be built, not begged for. He turned to the Afro-descendants gathered before him and made one final invitation. Come back, invest, live here, let us rebuild together. This was more than sentiment. It was strategy, the transformation of memory into movement. By calling the diaspora home, Traoré was exporting hope and importing purpose. Each returnee is not a statistic, but a symbol. Africa is no longer waiting to be rescued. It is rescuing itself. From an analytical view, this marks the evolution of his revolution. It began with resistance. Then came sovereignty. Now it matures into prosperity. Traoré's final message to the world is clear. Once Africa was enslaved to feed the world. Today it rises to feed itself, and one day it will feed the world again. From my perspective, this is not mere optimism. It's realism powered by pride. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as a symbol of struggle, now stands as a beacon of rebirth. Because this is no longer just about Burkina, or even the Sahel. It's about a continent remembering its worth, reclaiming its story,